No one would miss you. He said it standing close enough that I could smell the detergent on his shirt. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It landed cleanly, like something rehearsed. I remember the pause afterward more than the words themselves, the quiet that followed. My chest tightened, not sharply but steadily, as if my body already knew what my mind was still trying to process. I stood there and waited for something to interrupt it. A sound, a reaction, some correction from the room. Nothing came. The silence felt heavier than the sentence. I noticed my hands had gone cold. I noticed I was holding my breath without meaning to. And then I noticed how quickly my body adjusted, how fast it tried to make space for what had just been said. That sentence mattered because it didn't surprise me. It confirmed something I had been circling for years without naming. I had always lived with the sense that my presence was optional, that I could be removed without much disruption. Hearing it out loud didn't break me. It clarified me. It made me wonder how long everyone else had been thinking it, and what would happen now that it was no longer unspoken. In my family, there was an unspoken order. Not written down, not discussed, but enforced all the same. My brother sat near the top of it. He was confident in a way that drew attention naturally. When he spoke, people listened. When he needed something, the room rearranged itself. I existed somewhere lower, in a role that required awareness but no authority. I learned early how to read moods, how to soften tension, how to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Affection was never dramatic or cruelly withheld. It was conditional and quiet. You earned it by being easy, by not needing reassurance, by not slowing anyone down. I became good at that. I learned to present a version of myself that asked for little and accepted less. I believed that if I did this consistently, I would be allowed to stay. The first moment that stayed with me wasn't loud. We were all together, talking about plans I was making. I remember feeling nervous but hopeful, letting myself imagine a future that belonged to me. My brother tilted his head slightly and said, "That's ambitious." The word sounded neutral, almost supportive, but his tone carried something else. The conversation shifted immediately. No one asked me to explain. No one followed up. I laughed softly, embarrassed by my own hope, and tucked it away. After that, moments like that multiplied. I would speak and be interrupted mid-sentence. I would offer an opinion and watch it be dismissed, then repeated by someone else minutes later and praised. When I asked for help, there was always a pause first, a sigh that made it clear I was asking for too much. None of it was aggressive enough to confront. It was just enough to teach me where I stood. There was the afternoon I spent hours helping with something no one else wanted to deal with. When it was done, my brother glanced at the result and said, "That's it?" As if my effort had been insufficient by default. There was the gathering where I sat quietly through dinner, nodding and smiling, realizing halfway through that no one had asked me a single question. I felt like furniture, useful for the room, invisible within it. I told myself this was normal, that families were complicated, that I was sensitive, that my expectations were unreasonable. I adjusted constantly, trimming parts of myself down to fit more comfortably into the space I was given. I thought that was maturity. I thought that was how you kept people. The moment that cut deepest came when I was already tired of carrying everything silently. I hadn't planned to say anything. I rarely did. But something in me was worn thin. I said carefully that I wasn't doing well. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't ask him to fix anything. I just wanted to be heard. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and looked at me with an expression I'd seen before. Impatience mixed with certainty. "You always make things heavy," he said. Then, after a brief pause that felt intentional, he added, "Honestly, no one would miss you." There was no anger in his face, No hesitation, just confidence. And in that confidence, something inside me closed quietly. I understood then that this wasn't frustration speaking. It was belief. A belief that had been forming over time, reinforced by my willingness to take up less and less space. After that, my internal world shifted. Outwardly, nothing changed. I still showed up. I still listened. But something essential withdrew. I stopped expecting warmth. I stopped offering vulnerability. I spoke less, not because I had nothing to say, but because I no longer trusted the space to hold it. Guilt followed me everywhere. Guilt for wanting more. Guilt for feeling hurt. Shame wrapped itself around my thoughts, telling me that my pain was evidence of weakness. Emotional numbness crept in slowly, not as relief, but as protection. It was easier not to feel than to feel and be dismissed again. I began to disappear in small, quiet ways. I answered questions briefly. I avoided situations where my absence would be less noticeable than my presence. I stopped sharing plans, stopped naming hopes. The idea of being unseen began to feel safer than the risk of being seen and minimized. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came one evening when I was alone, sitting in silence, realizing that I could vanish emotionally and no one in my family would notice. The thought didn't panic me. It settled, and that calm frightened me more than anything else had. In that quiet, clarity began to surface. I started to see the pattern without softening it. How my brother's certainty had been built on my compliance. How my willingness to absorb discomfort had allowed him to move freely without reflection. I saw how the family dynamic depended on someone like me to hold what no one else wanted to acknowledge. The consequences stayed inside me. I doubted myself constantly. I replayed conversations, wondering what I should have said differently. I felt shame for wanting acknowledgement, guilt for feeling hurt, exhaustion from years of self-editing. I withdrew emotionally, even from myself, unsure of what I was allowed to feel. But alongside the numbness, something else emerged. Not healing, not strength, awareness. I began to understand that the problem was never my presence. It was the role I had been assigned. I had been useful, quiet, accommodating. I had never been allowed to be fully human. When my brother said no one would miss me, he was wrong. Not because people would suddenly regret my absence. Not because there would be apologies or recognition. He was wrong because I would miss me. The parts of myself I had slowly erased to keep the peace. The voice I had learned to silence. Those parts mattered, even if no one else had learned how to see them. There was no dramatic ending, no confrontation, no apology, just a gradual reclaiming of space inside myself. A decision to stop explaining my pain to people who had already decided it was inconvenient. If you grew up learning how to disappear to survive, you might recognize this quiet shift. The moment when you realize that being missed was never the measure of your worth, and that the silence you were taught to accept says more about the people who needed it than about you.